"Give me the fat one," Mountain Man said, after being offered 10 mail-order brides. "Give me the fat one," the giant Mountain Man said. His voice rolled across the crowded square like distant thunder, silencing the laughter and whispers. Copper Ridge had never seen such a spectacle. 10 mail-order brides, brought west in polished wagons, stood lined up like cattle at an auction block. The men, ranchers, merchants, prospectors, chose quickly, proudly leading away slender young women who smiled with forced politeness. But Delia Murphy remained. 28 years old, broad-hipped, soft-faced, her frame weighed heavy against her plain dress. She had crossed half a continent for a husband. Instead, she was left alone, an extra body, a clerical mistake, a cruel joke. "Too fat to marry," one man sneered. "She won't last a mile up here," another chuckled. The women already chosen glanced away, embarrassed for her. Delia stared at the dirt beneath her boots, her cheeks burning with shame. Cornelius Weatherby, the slick businessman who had arranged the spectacle, cleared his throat. "Well, gentlemen, it seems we have one bride left unsold. Any takers?" His smile was sharp as a knife. "Surely someone here can use a sturdy woman?" The crowd erupted in jeers. And then came the sound, the heavy, deliberate strike of hooves on cobblestones. A horse taller and broader than any seen in town carried a man carved from the mountains themselves. Jeremiah Stone, known in fearful whispers as Thunder Peak, swung down from the saddle. Towering, scarred by weather and wilderness, his gray eyes scanned the line, then fixed on Delia. "I'll take her," he said without hesitation. "The fat one." Gasps, murmurs. Weatherby's grin faltered. The crowd recoiled from Jeremiah's size and silence. Delia lifted her head for the first time, her heart thundering in her chest as the mountain man's shadow fell across her. Delia Murphy had not always been considered worthless. In Boston, she had been the dependable one, the sister who rose before dawn to tend to younger siblings, the daughter who kept her father's books in order after her mother died. But with too many mouths to feed and too little money, her family quietly decided she was expendable. A mail-order bride agency in San Francisco offered a solution: ship her west, let another man take responsibility. She had boarded the train with trembling hope, clutching a small satchel of hand-sewn linens and a Bible. She dreamed perhaps, just perhaps, that somewhere there might be a man who could see her worth beyond the extra flesh on her bones. But Copper Ridge had no such mercy. The other 9 brides had been thin, pale, delicate. They were chosen quickly, paraded away with promises of ranch homes and gold claims. Delia had stood silently as the crowd shrank, her heart sinking with each bride taken, until she alone remained on the platform. "She's a mistake," Weatherby announced with a theatrical sigh. "But perhaps one of you fine gentlemen has unusual tastes?" Laughter rippled. A drunk miner shouted, "I wouldn't take her if you paid me." Another added cruelly, "Too fat to ride a horse? She'll kill it with her weight." Delia bit her lip until she tasted blood. She had endured insults her entire life, but never before in front of so many eyes, never with her future at stake. Shame pressed heavy on her chest until she could hardly breathe. And then Jeremiah Stone. The crowd parted like wheat before a plow as he approached. He was a man spoken of in stories more than in fact. Some said he'd killed a grizzly bear with his bare hands. Others swore he was half wild, a hermit who hadn't spoken to another soul in years. He was taller than any man Delia had ever seen, his shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. His beard was thick, streaked with iron gray, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds gathering. Most men looked at Delia with mockery or pity. Jeremiah looked at her as if measuring her strength. "I said I'll take her," he repeated, his voice low but unyielding. He reached into his coat and laid down a heavy pouch that clinked with gold coins. $500, double your asking price. Weatherby blinked, momentarily stunned. Mr. Stone? Surely one of the younger girls? Jeremiah's gaze cut sharp as an axe blade. "I don't want a porcelain doll. I want her." The murmurs rose louder, scandal and disbelief mingling with fear of the mountain giant. No one dared argue further. Delia's knees shook beneath her dress. No man had ever claimed her, not for marriage, not even for a dance. And yet this stranger, feared and whispered about, had chosen her without hesitation. "Come," Jeremiah said simply, extending his massive hand. Delia hesitated, staring at the calloused palm, then at the eyes above it. They were not cruel nor mocking. They held only certainty. Trembling, she placed her hand in his. As he led her away from the jeering crowd, whispers trailed behind them like smoke. "He's mad. He'll eat her alive. The beast has taken the fat girl." But for the first time since arriving in Copper Ridge, Delia felt a strange flicker in her chest, something dangerously close to hope. The wagon wheels creaked as they left Copper Ridge behind. The jeers of the crowd still echoed faintly in Delia's ears, but with every mile the town disappeared into dust. The air grew cleaner, and the silence of the open land wrapped around her like a cloak. Jeremiah sat at the reins, shoulders squared, saying little. The draft horses moved at a steady pace, their breath steaming in the cool spring air. Delia sat beside him, clutching her satchel tightly, unsure if she should speak. Finally, he broke the silence. "You hungry?" She blinked, startled. "A little." Jeremiah reached behind the bench, pulling out a small cloth bundle. Inside was jerky, hard bread, and a tin flask of water. He handed it over without looking at her, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Delia hesitated. Back home, food had always been a weapon. Her stepmother calling her greedy, her brothers snatching morsels to mock her appetite. But Jeremiah's offering carried no malice. She ate quietly, the salty jerky warming her stomach. The trail wound upward into pine forests. Snow still lingered in shaded hollows, though green shoots pushed stubbornly through the thaw. The higher they climbed, the thinner the air grew. Delia's legs trembled when Jeremiah halted the wagon to give the horses rest. "You'll ride," he said simply. He guided her onto one of the horses with surprising gentleness for such a large man. She expected him to mock her weight, but he adjusted the saddle and reins as if she were precious cargo. As they pressed on, Delia dared a question. "Why did you choose me? Truly?" Jeremiah walked beside the horse, his stride long and tireless. For a moment she thought he would ignore her. Then he spoke. "Because you look like someone who's had to endure." He glanced up, his eyes catching hers. "Life up there will test you. Pretty faces don't last through winter storms, but grit, that lasts." Delia's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken of her weight without cruelty. He hadn't said she was strong despite being large. He had said she looked strong because she endured. That night they made camp in a small clearing. Jeremiah built a fire swiftly, stacking logs so the flames leapt high. He handed Delia a thick blanket made of wolf pelts, then set about cooking beans and salt pork. in an iron pot. Delia watched him from across the firelight. He moved with practiced efficiency, chopping wood, checking the horses, adjusting the fire, but never barked orders or treated her as a burden. When she tried to help, he simply nodded, letting her fetch water from the stream and stir the pot. They ate in silence, but it was a companionable silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant call of an owl. Delia's body ached from the journey, yet her heart felt lighter than it had in years. When she yawned, Jeremiah spread out a bedroll near the fire. "You sleep here. I'll keep watch." Her brows furrowed. "Don't you need rest?" He shrugged. "I'll sleep when the fire burns low. Wolves prowl in these parts." Delia lay down, the warmth of the flames lulling her. She watched him as her eyes grew heavy. He sat on a log, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the tree line. He looked less like a beast and more like a sentinel carved from stone, guarding her through the night. At dawn, she woke to find a tin mug of hot coffee waiting beside her bedroll. Jeremiah was already saddling the horses, his breath clouding in the morning chill. The days passed in that rhythm, travel, campfires, unspoken kindnesses. Slowly, the fear that had knotted Delia's chest began to ease. She found herself humming old Irish tunes as she cooked. Jeremiah never said much, but sometimes she caught the corner of his mouth twitch upward as though her songs stirred something long buried. On the fourth day, as they reached the foothills of Thunder Peak, Delia paused to catch her breath. She turned and saw the world spread wide beneath them, endless valleys, rivers glinting like silver, forests stretching to the horizon. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jeremiah stopped beside her, his massive frame casting a shadow across the trail. He followed her gaze to the horizon, then said quietly, "It's home." For the first time, Delia realized she might belong somewhere too. When the cabin finally came into view, Delia stopped short. She had expected a crude shack of logs, the kind of dwelling that reeked of damp and loneliness. But what stood before her was a home, a true home. Built of massive pine timbers, the two-story cabin perched on the slope like a fortress, its roof pitched high against heavy snows, smoke curling steadily from a stone chimney. Wide windows let in the afternoon light. A porch wrapped around the front, its railing carved with patterns of bear and eagle, each line cut by hand. Delia's mouth parted. "You built this?" Jeremiah tied off the wagon team, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Every beam, every nail, hammered myself. Took me near 12 years." Inside, the warmth struck her like a wave. The great stone hearth glowed with fire, a cast-iron kettle steaming gently. Animal skins and thick rugs softened the floor. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with trophies of the hunt as she expected, but with books. Hundreds of them. Medical journals, Shakespeare, an atlas worn with use. A long table stood beneath the window, sturdy and polished smooth. On it sat a violin, gleaming in the firelight. Delia's heart thudded. This was no beast's den. This was a sanctuary. "You'll sleep upstairs," Jeremiah said, leading her to a room with a wide feather bed, quilts folded neatly on top. A pitcher of fresh water waited on the nightstand. A vase of pine boughs stood in the window, green and fragrant. "It's yours." Delia touched the quilt with trembling fingers. No one had ever prepared a space for her before. Back home, she'd always been shoved into corners, told she took up too much room. Here, Jeremiah had given her a room bigger than anything she had known. That first evening, She cooked a meal with what she found in the pantry: beans, salted pork, onions. Jeremiah watched silently as she moved about the kitchen, his bulk filling the doorway. When she set the food before him, he bowed his head in thanks, his voice low but steady. "You cook like someone who knows hunger." Delia flushed. "And you eat like someone who's been alone too long." A shadow flickered across his scarred face, but then he gave the smallest of nods. The days that followed settled into rhythm. Jeremiah rose at dawn, splitting wood with the kind of strength that sent echoes through the valley. Delia woke to the sound of the axe, the smell of pine resin sharp in the cold air. She would set water to boil, bake biscuits, and sometimes fry eggs when he returned from tending the traps. When snow fell, she swept the porch, humming old ballads from Ireland. Jeremiah never asked her to stop. In fact, more than once, she caught him pausing at the door, listening. He taught her things too: how to carry wood without straining her back, how to sharpen a knife until it could cut silk, how to set a snare for rabbits. Once, he showed her how to fire his rifle. Her hand shook on the stock, but he stood behind her, his massive hands guiding hers. The shot rang out, echoing off the mountain, and she laughed, startled by her own success. Jeremiah's lips twitched, almost a smile. Every gesture was small, yet weighty. He always let her eat first. He patched a tear in her shawl without a word, the stitches neat and steady. One morning she found a wooden comb on her nightstand, carved by his own hand, polished, smooth as glass. Little by little, Delia's fear ebbed. The voices of the town still haunted her, the laughter, the jeers, but they grew dimmer in the steady warmth of the cabin. She began to see herself not as a burden, but as a woman with a place. One night, as the wind howled outside and snow plastered the windows, Delia sat by the fire sewing. Jeremiah took the violin from its case. The bow drew across the strings, filling the cabin with a mournful hymn. His eyes closed, and for a moment the stone-hard mask of his face softened. Delia listened, her heart aching at the sorrow in the notes. When the song ended, she whispered, "That was beautiful." "It was Mary's favorite," he said quietly. "My wife, before she died." Silence hung heavy. Delia reached across the table, laying her hand over his. "I'm sorry." He didn't pull away. His fingers, rough and calloused, closed gently around hers. It was the first time he had touched her without necessity, and it was the first time Delia realized she wanted him to. Spring melted the deep snows of Thunder Peak, turning icy streams into torrents and filling the valleys with new life. For a time, Delia and Jeremiah lived in a peace she had never known. Yet peace on the frontier was always fragile. It began with whispers in town. When Jeremiah rode down to trade furs and buy flour, he overheard Crawford's men stirring trouble in the saloon. They told anyone who'd listen that Jeremiah Stone had kidnapped his bride, that the fat Irish woman was being held against her will in a mountain prison. "They'll believe it," Jeremiah muttered when he returned, tossing his rifle against the wall. His jaw worked hard, as if he chewed the lie like gristle. Delia looked up from the bread she was kneading, her stomach turning cold. "What do you mean?" He paced, boots grinding against the floorboards. "Crawford spreading poison. Says he has papers from Weatherby proving you were property of his company. He'll claim I stole you." Her hands trembled in the dough. "Property? But I chose to come with you." Jeremiah's eyes softened as he met hers. "I know, but men like Crawford don't care for truth. They care for gold. Delia sat, her knees weak. All her life she had feared being nothing more than baggage, something to be bartered or discarded. Now the world threatened to strip away even the fragile dignity she had begun to build. And worse, she saw something else in Jeremiah's eyes. Guilt. "What is it you're not telling me?" she asked quietly. He stilled. For a long moment the fire popped between them, filling the silence. Then he drew a long breath. "There is silver in these mountains," he said, "a vein richer than most men will ever see. I found it years ago after Mary and Thomas died. I kept it secret. Didn't want the town, didn't want the greed. I thought," his voice caught, "I thought it was cursed, that the mountain took my family as punishment for me finding its treasure." Delia's breath hitched. She stared at him, seeing not the unshakable mountain giant, but a man bowed by grief and superstition. "And now Crawford knows?" Jeremiah nodded. "Or suspects. Enough to stir trouble." The weight of his secret pressed down on both of them. Delia felt the fear of losing the life they had begun together. She also felt something sharper, hurt that he had carried such a burden alone, never trusting her with it until forced. "You should have told me," she whispered. His shoulders slumped. "I couldn't. Not after the life you had, being treated like you were nothing. I couldn't bear for you to think I brought you here because of riches. I wanted you to know you were enough." Tears blurred Delia's vision. She had spent her whole life invisible, unwanted, mocked. And here was this scarred, grieving man telling her she was enough. Still, the danger pressed hard. "What will they do?" she asked. "They'll come," Jeremiah said simply. His gaze turned to the window, to the jagged peaks beyond. "And when they do, we'll stand." That night, Delia lay awake in the feather bed, listening to Jeremiah move about below. She heard him oiling the rifle, stacking firewood, preparing as though war crouched just beyond the tree line. Sleep eluded her. She turned over his words in her mind. You were enough. For the first time, she realized she was not afraid of Crawford, not even of the lies. What terrified her was the thought of losing Jeremiah to bullets, to bars, to despair. At dawn, when Jeremiah stepped onto the porch, he found Delia already there, shawl tight around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the rising sun. "If they come," she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her chest, "then I'll fight beside you." He looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Not beast and burden, not rescuer and rescued, but partners, and perhaps, just perhaps, something more. The first shot came at dusk. Delia was setting bowls of stew on the table when the crack of a rifle split the quiet. A pane of glass shattered above the hearth, scattering shards into the fire. Jeremiah was already moving, dragging her to the floor, his voice low but steady. "They're here!" Crawford had come with 6 armed men, their torches flickering in the growing dark. They circled the cabin like wolves, shouting demands. "Stone, send the fat wench out. She belongs to Weatherby's company by law, and we'll see justice done." Delia's stomach clenched at the venom in their voices, but Jeremiah only chambered a round in his rifle. He looked at her, eyes steady, as if asking a question without words. She answered by gripping the shotgun he had pressed into her hands days earlier. The siege began. Gunfire cracked against timber walls, but Jeremiah had built this cabin to endure mountain storms. The logs held. He fired through narrow slits he had cut in the shutters, every shot measured. Delia loaded shells with trembling but determined hands, her knuckles whitening with each click. Hours stretched like years. Torches lit the snow outside, shadows writhing. Crawford's voice rose above the din, oily and cruel. "She's not your wife, Stone. She's merchandise. I'll give her a fine bed in San Francisco, finer than you ever could." Delia's heart surged with rage. For so long she had believed those lies that she was less than unworthy a burden. Not any more. She stood at the window, raised the shotgun, and fired. The blast scattered Crawford's men, silencing their jeers for a breathless moment. Jeremiah turned, eyes blazing with pride. "That's my girl!" The fight raged through the night. Men tried rushing the porch. Jeremiah met them with brute strength, swinging the butt of his rifle like a hammer. Delia dragged buckets of water to douse flames when they tried setting the walls alight. Smoke and gunpowder filled the air, choking and hot. Just before dawn, Crawford himself forced his way inside, revolver drawn. His gaze locked on Delia, sweat dripping down his face. "You'll come with me, girl," he snarled, "or I'll kill your beast." Jeremiah stepped between them, blood streaking his arm from a grazing bullet. "You'll touch her over my dead body." Crawford's sneer widened. "So be it." The shot rang out, but it wasn't Crawford's. Delia had raised her weapon, her hand steady at last. Smoke curled from the barrel. Crawford staggered, shock etched across his face before collapsing at her feet. Silence followed. Outside, the remaining men fled into the trees, their courage broken. The siege was over. Jeremiah turned to her slowly. His chest rose and fell, ragged with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with something deeper, something unshakable. "You saved us," he said hoarsely. Delia lowered the gun, her arms trembling now that it was over. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "No, we saved each other." By the time the sun rose, silence blanketed Thunder Peak. Snow glittered like broken glass across the valley, untouched except for the blood-stained tracks of men who would never dare return. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, throwing soft amber light across the battered walls. Delia sat on the hearth rug, her skirt singed at the hem, her cheeks smudged with ash. Jeremiah lowered himself beside her, every movement heavy with fatigue. His arm was bandaged where she had stitched the wound with trembling but careful hands. For a long time, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the hollow between them. Finally, Jeremiah reached out, rough fingers brushing hers. "You're safe here," he murmured. The words were gravel, but behind them was something gentler, something she had never known. "This cabin, this mountain, it's yours now if you'll have it." Delia's throat tightened. She had never been offered anything of her own. Not a home, not a name, not even the dignity of choice. And now this giant of a man, this scarred soul who had seen her when no one else would, was giving her everything. Tears welled hot and spilled freely. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, hearing the steady thunder of his heart. For the first time in her life, it sounded like home. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, whispering of dangers yet to come, of the world that would not easily let them be. But here, in the circle of his arms, Delia no longer cared. The firelight glowed on their faces as Jeremiah bent his head close. "Together," he said softly, and Delia, her voice breaking but certain, answered, "Together." Love stories like Jeremiah and Delia's remind us that sometimes the world's rejection leads us to the one place we truly belong, A woman once mocked for her size found a man who saw her strength. A mountain man, once buried in grief, found a partner who brought him back to life. I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Do you still believe love can rise above cruelty and doubt? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay close, because if you believe in second chances, the next story is meant for you.